What's up, Ravens fans? This is Chase Coburn here with Flock Forever. The Ravens have officially hired all the coaches that they want on their staff. Jesse Minter got to work right away, brought in the guys he wanted, and the staff is now complete. We're going to break down some of those staff changes, but more specifically, the three coordinators Baltimore brought in, all different from last year. And Declan Doyle as offensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver as defensive coordinator, and Anthony Levine Sr. as the special teams coordinator. What they all bring to the table and how they can help really turn this Baltimore team around, both in their culture and their mindset, but then also in their X's and O's on the field. Plus, you guys saw the thumbnail. We're also going to break down Declan Doyle's recent comments made about Lamar Jackson at his introductory press conference alongside Jesse Minter and his fellow coordinators in Baltimore. Was that really a knock against Lamar, or was that necessary in setting forth this new culture and this new mentality in Charm City? We're going to break that all down and more. Please be sure to subscribe, follow, share, and view. If you haven't seen our full breakdown of the Jesse Minter hire, please be sure to check that out. I'll put a link on the screen right here. You guys will certainly want to see that. We did a pretty nice breakdown of how personally I think Jesse Minter is going to help change things in Baltimore. That Jesse Minter is going to be obviously the leader in reinstilling that defensive aggressiveness, that defensive confidence, and I think returning Baltimore and their fan base to a place that they want to be at as one of the contenders and the pillars of the National Football League. So again, if you haven't seen that, link on the screen or link in the description as well, you guys should be able to check that out. But the one thing with Jesse Minter is I wondered, how is he going to hire his staff? Because that's actually a really underrated element. Usually it's not something that coaches need to worry about after the first year. But even when coordinators go away, right? John Harbaugh kind of had mixed results. I thought he was decent in hiring coordinators. I thought the Greg Roman hire was successful for when it needed to be. I thought maybe he got rid of him a little bit too late, but Todd Monken was a good hire. Mike McDonald was a good hire, obviously. Now there were some in there, obviously Zach Gore kind of in the back end where that it didn't look so good. But Jesse Minter, I think, already established that he knows exactly what he's looking for. And I think that was really the encouraging sign during this hiring process was Jesse Minter had a plan in place and he executed on that vision. He got to work right away. He grabbed some of the top assistants available. The Ravens weren't just kind of Golsing and just kind of waiting for other teams to pick their pieces, right? Even look at John Harbaugh in New York. The Giants took a really long time to officially establish their staff, especially when Harbaugh was the first coach hired. They just assumed they would get Todd Monken as offensive coordinator. They watched other top OCs get some jobs and then have to settle for Matt Nagy, which that's a different discussion for a different day, whether that was even the right hire. But either way, I just think Jesse Minter got to work right away. He did not waste any time. And what I like about him is I also like not only did he execute on his vision, but I also agreed with his vision, right? He was clearly in the mindset of let's bring in youthful, creative minds and or coaches who live and breathe that Baltimore Ravens standard that he set forth and he reaffirmed last week at the press conference. He said, quote, he wants a physically dominant team that plays together, well-connected, and plays football the right way. So we either wanted a creative mind and or somebody who can help who can help really create a culture in Baltimore that allows them to be that physically dominant team that plays together, plays connected, and plays football the right way. And I think he clearly did that in his three coordinating hires. He brought in Declan Doyle, one of the hottest offensive commodities on the market. Yes, he's young. Yes, he's inexperienced as a play caller. But we're going to break down how that shouldn't be held against him. And then he brought in Anthony Weaver, a former Raven and a former Ravens assistant who preaches for an energetic physical group. And that's really what I've loved about him so far here in his short-lived, thus far, tenure as defensive coordinator in Baltimore. We're going to break that down. And then, of course, bringing in Anthony Levine Sr. as special teams coordinator, a 12-year veteran, a Super Bowl champion with this franchise. He's been with the franchise as an assistant special teams coach. So again, somebody who understands that Ravens mindset and mentality and known always to be one of the more aggressive and hardworking Ravens when he was on the field, again, for that 12-year career. So Minter executed on that vision. He even looked down to the assistants. He knew what he wanted, and he was able to get what he wanted here on the open market. We've already did our full breakdown on Minter. Let's break down each of the three coordinators, Declan Doyle, Anthony Weaver, and Anthony Levine Sr. And I want to spend most of our time here on Declan Doyle because I think he's been the most controversial of the coordinators that Baltimore has hired and probably the most important, right? Not that Anthony Weaver's job isn't important, but Jesse Minter is the defensive play caller. Jesse Minter is the captain of that defense. They really, I think kind of the first reaction for Ravens fans when they didn't go an offensive coach was who's going to be the offensive coordinator. It is probably the most important position on this team, except obviously for Jesse Minter being the head coach. And look, I think a lot of Ravens fans are skeptical about Declan Doyle because he is 29 years old. He'll be 30 soon, but he's 29 years old and he hasn't called plays before. But don't let his age dictate your viewpoint about how great he's going to be, right? If you're not going to trust Jesse Minter, you're not going to trust all the other reporters and analysts that have suggested that Doyle is one of the best offensive minds in football, then trust Mike Macdonald, the Ravens' former defensive coordinator, who is now a Super Bowl champion in Seattle. Another guy who got to work right away in replacing Clint Kubiak, his offensive coordinator, who left for a job in Seattle. He hired Brian Fleury as offensive coordinator, but he hasn't called plays either. And what I found so interesting was Macdonald essentially said they got to start play calling sometime, right? Like, all of the best coordinators at some point have been first-time play callers. And so if you're the Ravens, you need to really, and as Mike Macdonald said, if you're any team, you just need to judge how great of an offensive mind they are and then trust that could translate into being a great play caller. And I think if you're wondering, is he a great offensive mind? I mean, everybody that's worked with him in every single organization he's been a part of praises his ability as an offensive coach, right? Declan Doyle, Ben Johnson said he's seasoned beyond his years. And he said, if you didn't know that he was 29 years old, you wouldn't blink an eye. That's coming from Ben Johnson, in my opinion, one of, if not the best offensive mind in football, one of my favorite head coaches in the NFL. If you're not going to trust him, trust Sean Payton, a Super Bowl champion, one of the best head coaches in the NFL for a very, very long time. And not only was he really impressed with what he did in his time kind of as an assistant under Sean Payton, but he said that he absolutely has head coaching potential, and that will, quote, will be quicker than Baltimore once. And that's kind of another element as well that I think a lot of people are ignoring. A lot of Ravens fans are wondering, is this going to work out? And nothing is guaranteed in the National Football League. But I think this will work out. I think it's more likely he's gone next year for a head coaching position at 30 years old than it is he's gone because it didn't work out and the Ravens wanted to part ways. Declan Doyle is that type of offensive mind where if you see one season of successful play calling, that's all you need with all of his other offensive intangibles to buy into that to be the head coach of your team. And so I think the Ravens are actually going to probably lose him quicker than they want, as Sean Payton said, because he is that unbelievable offensive mind. I do want to break down some of the things he said at the press conference, though, because he's taken a lot of flack from national media regarding the comments he made about Lamar Jackson, which I thought were very misinterpreted by the national media, and I thought are being maybe misconstrued by some of the fans who are reacting to those headlines. I first want to bring up one of the key points that Declan Doyle made is that already in his experience with Lamar Jackson, he's praised his growth mindset, his willingness to listen, and his hunger to get even better after already achieving so much. Right? He's a 2-time MVP, a 3-time first-team All-Pro, and Declan Doyle is already amazed at how Lamar Jackson, we've always seen this from him, is always looking to get better, right? He's always taking those reps. He's always making sure that he could be at his highest level of ability and prove all those doubters wrong. We've always seen that from Lamar Jackson. But the one thing that a lot of people have been criticizing is some of his, quote, criticisms of Lamar Jackson, because essentially Doyle said that Lamar Jackson can make any play, that he can be Superman, but he wants some of those plays to be kind of refined and executed differently before the plays break down and try to limit Lamar Jackson's Superman plays. A lot of people are saying that as, oh, Lamar always tries to do too much, or Lamar's trying to run around, and he's criticizing Jackson's ability as a signal caller. No, he's actually more acknowledging what he needs to do in his job, which is make sure that Lamar Jackson doesn't need to be Superman. I love watching Lamar Jackson just break off 3 defenders and find Zay Flowers 50 yards down the field, but that's not a sustainable offensive method. And I think in the final years of Greg Roman and in the final years of Todd Monken, the Ravens became solely dependent on Lamar Jackson's Superman plays. And Declan Doyle wants to make sure that you have a quarterback that can make those plays, but that those plays aren't necessary at such a high rate like we saw in 2025 and like we saw in 21 and 22 in the final years with Greg Roman. But the main criticism that Doyle has gotten is how essentially Doyle said that he wants everybody to show up to OTAs and that the expectation is that everybody is showing up to OTAs, essentially saying that championship standards require work, collaboration, and early relationship building between players and coaches. And a lot of people think that Declan Doyle saying that everybody needs to be at OTAs and everybody is expected to be at OTAs is singling out Lamar Jackson and taking a shot at his new two-time NFL MVP quarterback. I disagree, because for me, I don't think he was trying to take a shot at Lamar Jackson. I think he was actually taking a shot at the former regime. Maybe he didn't even know it. But for me, yeah, Lamar Jackson usually does not show up to OTAs. I think he showed up to one of the 6 days. It was like the first day he didn't really work much with the team. But here's the thing. I am not in any way, shape, or form criticizing Lamar Jackson's leadership or Lamar Jackson's ability to grow. Declan Doyle mentioned how his growth mindset is such a important part of Lamar Jackson's mindset as an NFL player. He's always willing to get better, always willing to take criticism, and always willing to take his play to the next level. That's what makes him so great. However, why is it such a bad thought Or why is it so crazy to say that Lamar Jackson should be at OTAs? Why should the Ravens worship this guy? Again, not saying Lamar can't be successful when he doesn't show up to OTAs. He hasn't showed up to OTAs the past few years, and he's played at an elite level in the National Football League. I'm not trying to diminish that at all. But Patrick Mahomes was at OTAs. Matt Stafford was at OTAs. Josh Allen was at OTAs. Joe Burrow was at OTAs. Why is it such an unreasonable expectation for right now, before the contract restructure, your $74 million quarterback to be at OTAs? Why is that such a terrible, outlandish thought? I just think that a lot of Ravens fans coddle Lamar Jackson in a way. And I think in general, not to the fault of Lamar, but to the fault of the past regime under John Harbaugh, there was a sense of complacency. And there was a sense of this, like, you know what, we're good. Right? We are good. And I think what Jesse Minter and what Declan Doyle and the standard that they are setting is that level of complacency is over. It is absolutely done. That level of satisfaction is absolutely over. The complacency in the final years under John Harbaugh was the biggest problem. They were doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's the definition of insanity. And what Jesse Minter and Declan Doyle are trying to set forth is that insanity is no longer accepted. You're going to show up to OTAs. You are going to try something different. It's not right. It's not bad on Declan Doyle's part to go and say that everybody should be at OTAs. Maybe he was singling out Lamar Jackson. That's not such a bad thing either. It's not like Lamar Jackson needs to be singled out or Lamar Jackson needs to be criticized, but Lamar doesn't need to be coddled either. He's an 8-year NFL veteran who knows exactly how to play in this league, who knows exactly how to win in this league. One of the winningest quarterbacks in the regular season in the history of the National Football League, and a guy who over the past 3-4 years has shown true abilities to be able to enhance that play in the postseason as well. So clearly Lamar Jackson is that level of player. So then he should also be willing to go and attend OTAs, and I'm sure he will, and I'm sure it won't be an issue. But no, Declan Doyle was not wrong to say that everyone should be at OTAs, even if it was singling out Lamar Jackson. It is ending this level of complacency. Declan Doyle and Jesse Minter are saying it's time to get to work. It's time to do something different. And if that's the expectation that's set forth, that's not such a bad thing. So I'm tired of people saying that Declan Doyle is disrespecting Lamar Jackson. Declan Doyle's job is to enhance on the abilities of Lamar Jackson, and everything I heard at that press conference indicates that he is a brilliant offensive mind who is going to be able to enhance on the abilities of the Ravens' 2-time NFL MVP quarterback. I'm very, very excited about Declan Doyle being the offensive coordinator here in Baltimore because I think that he is going to provide such a unique perspective to this offense, and I think what the Ravens need to hope is that he is very, very good to where you want him to be your offensive coordinator for a long time, but not good enough to where he wants to leave, right? I think the Ravens, again, are probably going to be, I bet you, I'm sure there's a greater chance he's gone for a head coaching opportunity than he's gone for being relieved of his duties. I think Declan Doyle is going to have a ton of success with Lamar Jackson here with the Baltimore Ravens. I'm obviously not going to do that kind of a breakdown for each of the coordinators, but I really wanted to focus on that point specifically because I think Declan Doyle was kind of the most controversial of the bunch here after that press conference and wanted to reaffirm I don't think it's controversial. I think what he said was correct. Moving on here to break down defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. As I mentioned earlier, the defensive coordinator position is not as important when you have Jesse Minter calling plays and actually really anchoring that defense. But I think Anthony Weaver brings a lot of things to that defense that will work really, really well with Jesse Minter. There are a few things that really stood out from his message right out of the gate. He said that this team cannot change in the fourth quarter and that they need to keep the pedal on the metal and play to win. I think that is one of the most under the radar kind of talking points from the John Harbaugh regime. Was the reason why things were going so horrible and the reason why they had more blown leads in a 5-year span than any team in the history of the NFL is because they play differently. I think they play not to lose. I don't think they played to win. And I think the biggest issue and the biggest culprit of that collapse was the defense. And a lot of those games, the Ravens offense did enough. Right? New England, they scored 24 points. They didn't have Lamar Jackson. That should have been good enough to win. Against Buffalo early in the year, they scored 40 points. That should have been good enough to win. If you look back in previous years, a lot of times the Ravens are scoring 35, 40 points in those games. That should be good enough to get the job done. but it's not, because the defense is usually the one collapsing in the final moments. And that's what I think Anthony Weaver is trying to fix. He's trying to make sure that those avenues don't exist down the stretch, especially through the air and kind of these holes that teams have been able to exploit. Ravens gave up the 9th most points in the fourth quarter of 2024, and they improved a little bit on that category last year, but I think Ravens fans know when they really needed this defense to play well in the fourth quarter, they did not see the Steelers game, see the Patriots game, see the Bills game, some of the more important games of their season on primetime on national television. They collapsed. And so Anthony Weaver's making sure that's not going to happen again. He's setting the expectation that we're not going to change in the fourth quarter. We're going to keep the pedal on the metal, and we're going to keep staying at that same defensive level. And that defensive level that he set is one of the other key things that I really love from him in his introductory press conference. He said that he wants to build a physical group that imposes their will and is exhausting to play against. Bingo. Another huge reason why I thought it was time to move on from John Harbaugh. This aggressive, physical, tough Baltimore Ravens team that they were kind of founded on with the Ray Lewises, the Ed Reeds, the Terrell Suggs, the Haloti Nadas, even, look back, Peter Bower, Rod Woodson, Tony Siragusa, right? That tough, physical, aggressive Ravens defense, that hasn't existed the past few years, especially since Mike Macdonald left. This team's looked lethargic. This team's had tackling issues. And that's actually been going on for a really long time, even during the Mike Macdonald regime and before the Mike Macdonald regime, the tackling issues. And so I think what Anthony Weaver is trying to set forth is we're going to have a shift in defensive energy. And I think that's important. And I think if the Ravens are physical, you're going to see this team play at a higher level. I think they were, again, lethargic. I think they were a little bit weak. I don't think they wanted it as much as their opponent. And I think that's why you saw NFC teams so uncharacteristically for the Baltimore Ravens bully the Baltimore Ravens. You saw the Philadelphia Eagles come into their building and bully them in 2024. You saw the Detroit Lions come into their building and bully them in 2025. And so you have to think that if you're a more aggressive and tough, mentally tough defensive team, you're not going to allow those NFC teams to bully you. You're going to play AFC North competitive football. And I think if you bring that type of energy from Anthony Weaver, a guy who's been an assistant on this team, a guy who's been a player on this team, a guy who understands that and bleeds the flock around and find out mentality, I think if you pair that alongside the creative play calling of Jesse Minter, that could be the answer to really solving all of their problems defensively. You bring in one guy in the secondary, sign one edge rusher, a drafted edge rusher. However you do it, you're adding a few pieces. You bring in this new regime, and I think you could be all set defensively. And I think you could go from a complete 180 from this team being one of the worst in the NFL, one of the least physical and aggressive in the NFL, to now being a defense that nobody wants to play against. And I think that is what Jesse Minter and Anthony Weaver could do together. And I think Anthony Weaver was not a great candidate as a head coach. I never loved him as a head coach, but him being the defensive coordinator, not even with play calling duties, but being able to utilize his strengths as a DC paired alongside Jesse Minter, that's a dangerous combination. And I think they are going to create that team that Anthony Weaver wants, that is a physical group that imposes their will and is exhausting to play against. I think you're going to see that come to fruition with those two at the helm and kind of anchoring that defensive unit. And last but not least here with Anthony Levine Sr., I also love this at special teams coordinator. Now, I know that's not as important a position, but I keep pointing. I feel like a lot of the things that I'm preaching here are almost the opposite of the past regime, which is exactly what I think a lot of fans wanted. A lot of people forget special teams, usually is not the offense or the defense as much of a talking point, but the special teams was awful last year in Baltimore. Awful. Jordan Stout was a great punter, but the kicking obviously let them down. The returning let them down. The returning's let them down forever since they let go of Devin Duvernay. They've had a variety of issues on special teams, and John Harbaugh is a special teams coach. And so I think hitting the reset button, promoting Anthony Levine Sr. to special teams coordinator, I think he brings a high-intensity, physical, and again, that flock around and find out mentality. I mentioned how he was a 12-year veteran with this team. He played over 50% of special team snaps in each of his 12 years in Baltimore. And he was always known, again, to be a durable, physical, aggressive piece. And I think he is going to be able to preach that message to some of Baltimore's special teams playmakers. Now, the Ravens actually do have a variety of special teams playmakers. Some of them may not return. Again, it's still pending, but undrafted linebacker Jay Higgins was fantastic on special teams. Keandre Jackson was one of my favorite players to watch on Baltimore last year. I think he forced a fumble or two, was always the first guy on the ball. I thought he did a really good job on special teams, as did Charlie Kohler. Again, all of those guys could be out the door, but if you're able to retain some of them back or create more Jay Higginses and create more Keandre Jacksons, you're going to be able to have those really, really strong special teams players with this new mindset. And I also think that Anthony Levine Sr., this is an opportunity for him to prove himself. And it is a big role, right? I mean, Jordan Stout is a free agent. We'll see if he resigns. He possibly could be departing. There are obviously severe concerns at kicker with Tyler Loop. What do the Ravens do there? The returning's been an issue. LeJonte Wester wasn't what he was advertised to be coming out of Colorado as a rookie last year. I do not think he did a good job returning. The Ravens' kick returning was terrible. And I even think the Ravens' coverage of kick returns was also terrible. Usually the Ravens were starting their drives when they were returning kicks from the 20 to the 25, and usually their opponents were from the 30 to the 35. And so from a field position standpoint, that was not ideal. And it's the little things like that. And Anthony Levine, could try to fix. And look, he may not try to fix. He may not fix them, right? Obviously, he's going to try. He's going to do his best to make sure that those problems aren't taking place here again in Baltimore. But it is a big risk. He has very little coaching experience, but I also understand the motive and the mindset behind bringing in Anthony Levine Sr. Again, he wanted either a young creative mind and or somebody that understands that Baltimore Ravens culture. And Levine is young, but Levine has also been in Baltimore for so long that he understands what Jesse Minter is going to be preaching here and understands that flock around to find out mentality that he is trying to reinstill in this group here in Charm City. That is 3 coordinators broken down. Again, if you want to see our full breakdown on Jesse Minter, link will be right here or again in the description below. Hope you guys really did enjoy this episode here of Flock Forever. A lot of coverage coming up soon with NFL free agency, the NFL draft, all of that stuff coming up in the coming day or in the coming weeks. And of course, with Lamar Jackson's contract extension, a lot of talking points surrounding the Ravens' 2-time MVP quarterback and 3-time first-team All-Pro. We're going to have a lot of coverage coming up soon, so please be sure to subscribe if you do enjoy the content. Share this around to other Ravens fans. We want to build a strong platform here on Flock Forever as the Ravens reach one of the more important stages of their new calendar year under their new regime. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Signing off, I'm Chase Coburn, saying so long from Flock Forever.